how did a simple translation, morph into this journey? Because the book itself, which I would recommend to all the audience to be able to read themselves and give, has traversed covered subjects right from the history of the origins of the song to the geography of the place, and then goes on to the metaphysics and philosophy. So how did it transform this? And it's a 3-year journey, I believe.
Well, it took that much long. I mean, of course, this didn't make it in time for my father's 80th birthday. He was much older by the time it came out. But yeah, it did take a while because for a very long time, I was not sure of what I was supposed to do. And there were many times my editor even thought I'm not going to finish it, which happens. So to answer your question on how this took place, in the sense that, as I told you, I didn't go in with any specific end game, saying I'm going to write this book or the other. It just turned out to be a series of happy accidents. And there were many times in the 3 years where I wanted to give it up and just go off. I mean, because so the only thing which kept me going was I was very curious. I mean, curious about the history more than anything else. So if you see a lot of, and see how we are very fortunate that the Tirumala temple is what it is. I mean, it is not only the most revered temple in many parts, among many, it is also the most studied. So the amount of scholarship which has been dedicated to this temple in the last 120 years is astonishing. So the amount of research work which has been done into various aspects of the temple are all, I mean, truly remarkable. This is one of the few temples which has a management which is quite extraordinary. I mean, the Tirupati Tirumala Devasthanam has done a great job. I mean, if you look at it in the context of the larger, where they were in 1933 when they took over, to how they have kept the temple going, and they are very, very service-oriented people. I mean, I benefited from that. So what happened was that beyond a point, I'm not a religious person particularly. There are enough religious scholars who can expound on this at great length. And there have been some modern commentaries. So I didn't want to touch on the religious aspect. But as you rightly said, very few know about the historical aspect. And the person who composed this is a very great saint, very famous saint called Prativadi Bhayankara Anna. And he was very, I mean, he was an extraordinary man, and I've written about his biography in the book. And his descendants, many of them have continued to, the family's tradition of excellence and service. And I mean, many of you may have been familiar with P.B. Srinivas, the famous singer. Now he is the descendant from Anna. So yeah, I mean, they were very helpful, the family members. I mean, a lot of them are in Hyderabad. There is a temple to Anna in Hyderabad, by the way. It is near Charminar, very old. I will send the link. It's got a statue of him. So yeah, the history aspect was a lot of curiosity for me. And the more I learned, the more I realized how little I know and how little we all know. So yeah, I just got sucked into the journey. And obviously, it must have tickled some historical research bone somewhere. So I kept doing it.
Right. Thank you. So I'll have the next question to Rupa. Before that, I wanted to share with you that this song is so ingrained as part of the folklore that many Telugu movies use this song as a device to indicate that this is a village that where the it's the starting point to show a movie where the village and all. So that's the it's very much resonates with the start of the day. Rupa, there's this question about this song, as you know, is all about talking to the God as one-on-one and trying to wake him up. So this aspect of humanizing God, how do you think it has played an endearing role in terms of building that connect with God? I mean, in general, any God. Since you have written about our ancient Indian wisdom, I would like you to address this question.
Okay, thanks, Venki. Yeah, so in Hindu thought or Indian thought, Vedic thought, whatever you want to call it, God has never been it's an energy. It's not a person. It's a nameless, formless, genderless, supreme, all-pervading energy that is all around us, inside us, antaryami, everywhere. So it's a very different conception of the supreme being than maybe some other religions. But even those religions in their ancient forms would have seen God like this. However, we have managed to somehow keep that thread running till today from 3,500, 5,000 years ago. And we still have that conception of God. And but it's also acknowledged that that conception of a formless God is perhaps too abstract for normal human beings to deal with. So you can't get a kind of succor from that kind of God. You won't get the kind of solace that you need to navigate samsara. So you need something a little more tangible that you can relate to, even for prayer, to focus on.
Yeah.
You need someone in a human form. But that was also very, very recent that gods were humanized in the history of Vedic religion or Hindu thought. It's only, our temples, the first temples were built well after the Buddhist cave temples and all that. It was inspired by them. And then we said, oh, maybe we should humanize and then to create an abode for that humanized figure, the first temples were built. And it's only 1,500 years ago. That is always a remarkable fact to tell people, because I don't think people realize the temples haven't been there forever and ever. And the good part about humanizing a God is that you can choose the relationship. That leeway is given to you, to us as Indian Hindus. We are allowed to choose. It's not a father figure, not only a father figure. It doesn't have to be an old man sitting in the sky who's watching everything you do and judging you. It's not that kind of conception at all. And the best kind of way to relate for most of us, and especially for children, for who I write for essentially, is as a friend. God is your friend, and it can be a male friend, female friend, and you can actually talk to him or her in first person. He's your equal, and that also the Vedas and Upanishads tell you. Of course, he's your equal because he's in you. You are him. Aham Brahmasmi. So it's a very unusual relationship, and you can fashion it according to your wish or need or fancy. Like it can just be your whim. I can be a mother. I can be a child. I can be a lover. I can treat God as anything, so the entire range of human relationships and human emotions can be explored with relation to God. So I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. Now that you have answered, I will give you the opportunity to question our guest. Before that, I just wanted to point out, in this book, Venkatesh Parthasarathy also talks about one Pillai Lokacharya, who gives a very beautiful explanation about understanding the different forms of para, and about the formless versus the guna. And the beautiful example is about how we can use water as the means. Like water is everywhere in the air, but we cannot perceive it. We know it is there, but we cannot perceive. That's one kind of knowing God. Then it is in the forms of rain or oceans where you have to be at that moment. That is one kind of avatars of knowing when you are in that exact yoga or point of time. Then there are the murtis and are all like the pools. They're static. You can go to them when you feel like going to them. And finally, once you passed all of this, there is water in the ground. You will have to, that is the nirguna akara, where you have to work hard to understanding that. I think there is so much more in terms of demystifying and simplifying, as long as we have the curiosity to search. And many great people. Now, I think I'll give you the opportunity to question Venkatesh Parthasarathy.
Okay. Hi, Venkatesh Parthasarathy. Everybody is Venki. And that was also the remarkable thing about this book. There were so many Venkateshes and Venkatachalas and Venkatadris and Tirumalas and people called these things. And of course, Anantashayanas and like everybody who is mentioned in this book often has a connection to the name itself, and many Venkateshes. So and Srinivas, of course. So it was fascinating for me to read the history of the Tirupati temple. Like I mentioned to you in a private conversation, Venkatesh, I have never actually visited the temple yet. It's there it's been on my bucket list for the longest time, but I just haven't. And I didn't grow up in a family that had a great reverence for, we were Shaivite, so you know how it is. So, you don't get too much of that intersection between these two families of Vishnu and Shiva. So so knew very little, except of course the Suprabhata every morning, not my house, neighbor's house. So it's very deeply ingrained. First of all, I didn't know that it had the idol itself, you say, is supposed to be Swayambhu, and nobody knows the provenance of the idol or when it came. But the temple itself is over 1,000 years old. And its history it felt like a microcosm of Bharat itself. Like India has been there forever and people have come and gone, but somehow the core essence of the temple or of India hasn't been touched despite all this. Somehow, what do you think? You have given some reasons in the book, but what do you think has kept this temple going through like really hard times, as you have mentioned, but coming out on top again, resurfacing again and again? The thing is, like you mentioned, we can come up with rational, logical reasons for it and try to find, but sometimes it may be better to leave it to because of the faith of his devotees. I mean, because people wanted it to continue, and because he himself perhaps wanted to stay here. What is your take on this?
You're right. I mean, I did mention it in my book. I think the faith of those who have a huge amount of belief and faith in Lord Venkateshwara is what has kept the temple going all these. As you said, we don't know how old the temple is. The Alvars have sung about the image, so we don't know. I mean, dating the Alvar is now is a completely different ballgame.
So fraught. I know.
I don't want to go there. Does the inscriptional records of this temple start from 700, 800 CE? So this is when, and by close to 800, 900, there was a large enough establishment for the then Chola dispensation to set up a separate administration.
Right. You've talked about Samabai, the wife of a Chola feudatory.
She was a feudatory, and she was the first person who was extremely munificent.
Yeah.
The temple. And she didn't stop with just giving it a very large grant. She also saw to it that the grant was set up the grant was administered very well. So the other thing which has kept the Tirumala temple going, apart from, of course, the huge faith of its devotees, is the systematic institution building which has happened over the last 1,300 years.
Yeah, and you talk about that when you talk about Ramanujacharya, that yes, he was a great saint and he was a fantastic spiritual leader, outstanding, towering. But more than that, and that part is not acknowledged very much, not more than that, but equally, he was also a great organizer. Yes. And the same is true of Shankara or the Buddha. Absolutely. They were great organizers of people and made sure that legacy would survive. And that's what you think the temple has also done?
No, that's right. They've, at every stage, whoever was, so of course, the faith of the devotees kept it sacrosanct, but the institution played a very, very significant role throughout. And it isn't as though the institution ended with one dynasty or the other. Yeah. They carried on. They may have slightly changed. So after the Cholas and then the Hoysalas came briefly, but then the Vijayanagar kings, and they were the really big. Achyuta Deva Raya used to literally begin every day. So the curious thing about Achyuta Deva Raya is his brother Krishna Deva Raya, whom you've written a book about, kept him captive in Chandragiri for most of his youth. So every day, and he was only allowed one thing. He was allowed to go to Tirumala. So Achyuta Deva Raya, Krishna Deva Raya's son, whom he had late in life, unfortunately died very young due to reasons which I'm sure you will tell everybody. But as a result, Krishna Deva Raya late in his life had to acknowledge that Achyuta Deva Raya would be his heir. So by the time he was brought into administration, his whole worldview was that of basically a major bhakta of Venkateshwara. So he was even ruling in his name. He did his Abhishekam in front of him, and he went and did one ritual himself, which must have caused a lot of confusion to people. But so he was a very, very major donor, and he also did a lot of stuff. But the Vijayanagar kings, right, beginning from Saluva Narasimha onwards, they were extremely beneficent donor, and they set up institutions which lasted right through. And the thing about this temple is, as you said, nobody's disturbed it because a lot of other economic benefit. People used to borrow from the temple. Many of the rulers, even the Nawabs of Carnatic looked after the temple.
I know. That's what, and the British did a great job of putting together records, compiling stuff, and
the British had an interest because they wanted to extract the hundi collections, so they couldn't allow the the thing which was so in fact, it was their principal source of revenue for a period of 20 years.
That's what you proposed. Is that right? I mean, I
So
guess
that is a hypothesis which has been proposed by a more eminent historian. Is that the East India Company's revenue accounts were kept afloat because they took over the hundi collections. But okay, be whatever as it may, I don't think we need to go down there.
Yeah.
The fact is that the temple, I mean, has just gone on from strength to strength. And the British then handed over the temple management to a group of sadhus who are now called the Vicharan Kartas. There are lots of, I mean, they did a great job while they were looking after it. And the TTD has been in charge since 1933. I think they've done an extraordinary job if you look at what they've achieved in the last 70 or 80 years. So yeah, this temple has been very well managed. Apart from the fact, of course, it is the go-to deity for everybody. I mean, it's everybody's friend.
Crowdsourcing
lessons. I think it is the last known avatar in terms of before the world ideally will come to its conclusion.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know. I'm sure perhaps you're right. The temple of Venkateshwara is a form of avatar called the Archa Avatar.
Yeah.
And according to the Divya Prabandham, there are 106 on earth. So he's one of the 106. So it's up to you. I mean, whether you think he is more important or somebody else. Matter of faith, really. Yeah. I myself don't know enough to comment.
Right.
Now that you bring up the Divya Prabandham, sorry, Venki Datla, I'm just giving it back to you after this one.
No, please go.
Yeah. So now that you mentioned the Divya Prabandham, I had no idea that the Alvar's compositions were so, intertwined with and so intrinsic to the worship at Tirumala. I always didn't think of it as, Tamil. I always thought of it as a Telugu place. To bring it down to, I know these divisions are only 1947 when the states were divided, which side of the border it fell on is, it was just a trick of whatever. But I had no idea that for so many years it had been the deity had been propitiated using the Alvar's work.
That started, I think, around 1100, 1200 after Ramanujacharya's, what he tried to do in terms of organization. But the Alvars themselves are as early as you want to believe.
Yeah.
And they are actually a set of saints who are completely non-sectarian. They are, and they were capable of great mystical insight. And they were also very evocative. I mean, you mentioned me talking about the hillside. All our literature is extremely evocative.
That's true.
You take the Suprabhatam itself, the Venkateswara Suprabhatam.
I know.
I mean, it's more than anything else a celebration of nature in the morning. Talking about cowherds. And,
that's what I was thinking. Our prayers are like natural history, social commentary, and political history, everything, in one. And even though we as Indians are not very good at preserving old stuff, right, we have preserved our prayers. And they in themselves offer so much insight into the times and what India was like. And, I think that's remarkable. I never thought of that. Of course, Kalidasa, Valmiki Ramayana, yes, a lot of description of the trees and, what. So that gives you an insight into what India must have been like. You talk about elephants, were they roaming the hills, Sheshachala?
Well, according to Anna, I mean, he has talked about it, and the Alvars have talked at great length about. Apparently, before there was a structure, there was a statue, and it used to be bathed by the elephants. Now, of course, this is poetic imagination, but elephants would have been there, and you'd be surprised. Around 20, 30 years ago, the herd of elephant finally made its way back to the Sheshachala hill.
Coming circle, full circle, as you said.
And Sheshachala is full of wildlife. It's full of wildlife. Kenneth Anderson has shot man-eating tigers at Mamandur, which is just 30 kilometers away from the temple. So, it's a very famous man-eating tiger of Mamandur, if you read Kenneth Anderson.
Yeah. All those,
I didn't want to bring it in because it would be too much of a digression, but
Yeah, but pennies keep dropping, you realize that everything is connected. Yeah, Venki, Datla, back to you.
About what does Venkat mean to the audience? I mean, not because it's my name or Venkatesh Parthasarathiy's name, but apparently it is one of the most widely loved and adopted name. So I would like to ask Parthasadi to give, I mean, Mohit wanted to know the meaning or origin of what Venkat means. Is there any context?
No, so basically, this is like many names in the Indian context. It's there is a concept called yoga rood, which means either it's a word that you made by joining, or it's a word which occurs naturally.
Okay.
Even the word Vasudev can either be a derived word in a Sanskrit, or it can be a natural word.
Okay.
So you can take Venkat in either context. So if you take the natural form, it is a description of a geographical feature, which comes from a Tamil, ancient Tamil, which defines the extent of the Tamil-speaking people. And the specific quote is, in the north there is Venkata Hill, and in the south there is Kumari, which is Kanyakumari. So you can take it as a naturally occurring word, or there is a Sanskrit derivation which means cutter of all, people, or cutter of all.
Okay.
So really, it's a matter, as Rupa said so nicely, in our tradition, it is really, I mean, you are given the choice to choose as you please. So it's really up to you. But both these words happens, and in many words, you have either a word which is to be taken in its natural sense, or it can be taken as a derived.
I think Mohit is looking for when plus cut. When representing sin and cut means remove. Is that what you're looking for, Mohit?
No, because I got engrossed with the story that has been given in the book, which is about the sage who commits a sin and he cleanses himself when he comes back to the hill. I think that's how the name has been derived in the book, and it's really a lovely story.
Yeah.
I've mentioned both. I've mentioned both the derivations, but it's up to you.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting. I don't remember it being mentioned. The Lord is known as Balaji by most North Indians. It's probably because one of the Vicharankartas, the Hathiram Babaji's story about the origin is he sees the God as a Bala, the child, or Bala as a woman. So there are two origin stories. So most of the North Indians would address, and which is why Mohit actually made the JPG as Lord Balaji Wake Up. Although I have said Venkatesh explicitly, he changed it to Balaji.
All right, okay. Well, I didn't know this, so thank you for sharing that. I mean,
So this is from the Hathiram Babaji's origin stories.
Right.
Yeah. So getting back to the song and the origin story, I think the song, and you have mentioned and described, and it's so glad that the whole book traverses of giving an English translation to those Sanskrit verses of the song and then running around the story. So the whole book is about nature, intoxicated bees to lotus flowers. So anybody with an interest in nature, I think, will fall in love with the book. So for such a prayer, which is so evocative, why do you think the whole question of who would have written it? For example, Annamacharya. I mean, Annamacharya Kirtanas in itself, everybody knows who the author is. Or every other song, we know Valmiki Ramayana. So why did in this particular case, is the author not attached to the song in itself?
So he is actually. I have translated, so the Suprabhatam is in 4 series. 4 sets of, there is the Suprabhatam, there is the Mangala Shasanam, there is the Stotram, and the Prapatti.
Yes.
I have only dealt with the first because the next 3 are so full of mystical meaning that it is best to let some religious teacher to expound. Now, every poet of his sort will leave what is called a mudra. Now, Annamacharya had a mudra, his son Pedda Tirumalacharya had a mudra, Chinna Tirumalacharya, they all had their mudras. So, Prativadi Bhayankara Anna, who was a composer, was a very, very towering Sanskrit scholar. And he was curiously trained by both the leading schools of thought in the Sri Vaishnava system, which is both Vedanta Desikan and the Pillai Lokacharya, the Tengalacharya, Manavala Mamuni. So he was the ultimate, mix of both. And he did this because he was told, in those days, you were told by your teacher to do this and you didn't really kind of, he was told, please do this. He did it in a state of, I think, grace. But so typically in such things, they will not attach their name.
Yeah.
However, he did praise his teacher. So there is a phrase in one of the other shlokas which says Saumyo Jamatri Munina, which is also a title for Manavala Mamunigal, who was by that time his teacher. So you would not yourself put your name in it, but you would mention your teacher's name. Now coming to Annamacharya himself has never in his any of his Sankirtanas mentioned himself. They have all got their mudra, so the mudra will be found, but he will never say that I did it. And he did such an extraordinary thing, one song per day for his entire life. So yeah, I mean, so but to answer your question, I don't think anybody was doing it for their own. I mean, none of the teachers or poets, they were poets, but they actually didn't see themselves as poets. Were doing them to, they were doing it more as a service. It was not to, make themselves well known or popular. That is a drawback in our tradition from a history point of view. For those of folks like me who are more interested in the history, it makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah. What is a mudra? Is it like an Ankitanama that you leave at the end, or is it like a symbol, an actual?
No, it's a word, or it's a
word. Yeah.
It will be a word somewhere. The symbolism actually is done more by the Kerala people, who also bring in the mats. So sometimes they will end it with a word which will give you the date of composition. Like the Narayaniam ends with a word, which if you transcribe using they have a certain type of cryptography in Kerala and even other parts of India in those days, will give you the number of days from the beginning of Kali Yuga when the poet ended composing it. But I mean, I don't think, most of the people want to simplify, so nobody would do all these things. So I think the Anna just wanted to kind of say that, look, this is by the grace of my teacher. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing with sculptors and temples. There are never any signatures of all the people, not even of the master sculptor who toiled there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the whole idea is in the Indian thought is that the artist only acts as a bridge between humans and gods. That is his role and or her role, whether it's a Bharatanatyam dancer or a classical musician. It is to invoke certain bhava in you, in the audience, certain rasa. You portray so that a bhava is evoked, but that it is mine is never, it's always been there. It was channeled through me. So putting your name on it, it's such a departure from what we have been taught now in the modern world, like copyrights and intellectual property.
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, it's such a, and there it was just shared for the benefit of humanity. And that is such a beautiful thing. That's why I wanted to ask you, did you find, I was exactly going to ask that same question, that we are so obsessed with dates, facts, names, and we even think of it as a honorable pursuit to find these things and lay them out for people. And you were, I'm sure, coming up against walls all the time, encountering like, we don't know, maybe at this time, maybe at dating, placing, like it's really hard. You've done a lot of detective work in the sense you talk about how in that Sawale Jawab Patti, after 300 years or some kind of time like that, you see that mentioned that the Venkatesh Suprabhatam is still being as part of the Suprabhatam in the morning.
1804, yes.
Yeah.
No, look, I came across that quite a lot. But as I told you, so there were many times you gave up.
Yeah.
So I'll give you the most simple thing is the biography of Anna.
Yes.
Has been written actually by a gentleman called Professor V.V. Ramanujan, who is not with us anymore. But that is out of print. So I had gone to Kanjipuram. I mean, I mentioned this in a private conversation.
Yes.
And I went to one of the descendants of Anna who told me about it. He said, look, what you're seeking to do, someone has already done. And it's in a pamphlet. And it's in my house. And right now there is a disarray. I don't know if I have it still. But why don't you go and meet this gentleman yourself? So I tried. And I called him. And the day I called him turned out to be, his son informed me that it was the 10th day since his father's passing. So, I mean, very unfortunate, but nothing I could do. So I left it. I just gave up. And then I went and I was having lunch with a friend whose husband, during the conversation, told me that he went to school with somebody who's called Prativadi. So maybe they connected. I said, okay, maybe. And then he called that gentleman and that person said, yes, and we have a society and we're all in Hyderabad. And so welcome anytime. And I went and they were very warm and extremely helpful. And they took me to, there is a temple in Hyderabad called Sitaram Bagh Temple outside Hyderabad, and where the officiating priest is a 92-year-old gentleman who's also a descendant of Anna. And he had that biography. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, so basically that's when they said, I mean, the whole message in this was, if you have a sense of wonder, I mean, you will continue looking for it. You may find it, not find it, but at least you'll have a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your postscript where you say that every time I wrote even 10 words, I ended up being so happy. And that's all. That made the whole journey worth it.
Yeah, that's right.
I
Yeah.
think books like these, prayers like these, scriptures, ancient things, which are imbued with those vibrations, even the temple at Tirumala itself. Just the so much faith and the trust of the devotees who've been there, the people who over thousands of years have recited it. Fantastic. And you talk about Mr. Anantashayana Iyengar also.
That's
You
right.
pulled him out from somewhere as well.
No,
Amazing.
I didn't pull him out. He was just he was the first person who recorded a Suprabhatam.
Yeah.
So while
Contrary to
go ahead.
No, nothing. You go. Thank you. That's all.
I think Parthasarathi was talking
himself
about that
was
being
talking.
the first recording put up officially by AIR
Yeah.
before our legend MS Subbulakshmi Garu made it more famous. Please go ahead,
Yeah.
sir.
No. So of course, all of us have grown up hearing MS Amma, but the first recording was done by P.V. Anantashayana Iyengar. He was a traditional reciter there, and his life is an extraordinary life. So finding about him took a lot of time and energy. I mean, it almost
That's
took
good.
so many months. And
Yeah.
who put me on to them finally was the gentleman who was MS Amma's secretary, is Atmanathan sir, Atma Mama as he's called. So when I went to him and I said, look, this is all that happened, and of course I got his views on MS Amma, and he said, this is all fantastic. Now, can I help you? I said, yes, I've been looking for the family of Anantashayana Iyengar. He said, I know them. So I will call them and I'll tell them, and if they're interested, they'll talk to you. And exactly that happened. And then, I went all over the countryside. The gentleman lives in Ramurthy Nagar in Bangalore.
But this is such a typically Indian thing. I know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and it's always like, books and telephone directories won't get you to them, but knowing people, it's always through people. And
I called him. He was very warm. He invited me home. They sat with me. I mean, whatever old press clippings, I've quoted one press clipping. That clipping, even Times of India didn't have, but he had. It made. So that was the part, this whole, as you said, I wouldn't call it detective work, this curiosity business.
Well, it is
Yeah.
following the scent, like,
Yeah.
just taking it wherever.
So-
Yeah, Venki, you have any
No,
other?
I think the singing of this song traditionally is a male dominion, but it took a lady singer to actually make this song popular, and I think it was slightly not part of the convention for a lady to sing. I think there is an anecdote about how MS Subbulakshmi actually went and checked up with Kanchi Acharya before she actually wanted to check this. So I think there's a lot of history about how we are open to, we are not boxed in when it comes to true
Yes.
devotion. I think that's the message that comes out. So when I was reading the book, I left with a feeling that in about, if somebody could pack in 173 pages, mythology to history to geography to philosophy to metaphysics, and about God, this is one that packs. So I wanted to ask Parthasarathi, did he ever get lost in his 3-year journey because there are so many doors opening, paths opening, and there is no end to actually getting lost in one particular path.
Yeah, at some point you have to say that this much and no more, and the book has to go out.
Yeah, I knew about Balaji because I did my own research while trying to read this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it must have been too much for him actually. So we should hear on how he brought himself back to the central point of his book.
I think to begin with, I think what Rupa said is correct. You never finish a book, you abandon it.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what happened in my stage. I mean, there's lots, I must tell you that what I have, so there's obviously lots of things. I lots of lines of inquiry I followed. Many were dead ends. Majority were dead ends. And these are the few lines of inquiry that I could get to. What would be nice if somebody could take some of these and go further, because there is so much to study. Now, I tried to get some of the English era records, and I could find some, but I have not looked at most of them. Somebody should go through the consultation books of the Fort St. George. I've started doing now after the book, but there's a huge amount of stuff about the Tirumala temple. Similarly, the Maratha records written in Modi script. I mean, there is a manuscript which I chased for something like 8 months, lying in the GOML Madras, which is the best account written in 1750, around that time, between 1750 and 60, by a Maratha administrator of the Tirumala temple. They had control of Tirumala temple for a very brief period.
Yeah.
So, and they used to submit like monthly reports at least, or maybe even weekly reports. So he has written a very definitive work, which is there in the library, in that archives, but we couldn't, I mean, it had got lost in the reorganization, or they couldn't find it. So there is so much you can do and study. I have just scratched the surface, I must tell you that. I mean, I'm glad you liked the book, but there is, this is, you can spend a few lifetimes.
Right. I think that's the purpose of a book like this, to intrigue anyone enough, the reader enough, so that they then go off on their own trip and pursue. Because it's impossible to give everyone everything, and that's not the point of it. Also, it's not to give a man a fish, right? It's to teach a man how to fish, and then he will find stuff for himself. Yeah. And so one more thing I wanted to ask you was about this archival material. I'm amazed to find that there are so many institutions that so loyally keep all these things, are ready to help anyone. It feels like a parallel universe. We live in this world, we don't even know of their existence, but as soon as you're pursuing some line of inquiry that leads to them, so many doors open up. So have we done it? Because I don't think of us as Indians as being good documenters or archiving or archivalists, but we seem to have enough institutions that do that.
So look, so that is the big tragedy of our of this country's cultural, historical, and literary tradition. In the last 70 years, this business of libraries and archives is declining, and now it is in a state of decay. Where and I don't see any significant activity to stem the tide. Just Sanskrit manuscripts. I'm not counting Prakrit, Pali, Persian, and the others. The Sanskrit manuscript, there is an estimate of between 5 to 6 million manuscripts. Now, at least till 60, 70 years ago, there were a group of extremely dedicated scholars who would take in every collection, every library, every manuscript collection, they would go through the manuscripts, write a descriptive catalog. Yeah. And those descriptive catalogs of those times, 70 years ago today, are good enough for you to read through as a lecture series. They're that good.
That's what you've said in the book. Yeah.
But today, when you talk about protecting your heritage, and you want to do a lot of things, I mean, we're all doing a lot of things to protect our heritage. The true protectors of our heritage are the frontline staff, the blue-collar workers in all these libraries and archives, who are paid bottom of the pyramid as far as government salaries go, but they are the ones who are protecting all these manuscripts, documents, cleaning them, keeping them, and ensuring that the termites are not getting them.
Right.
So that's where, and look, so it's. I mean, I don't know what to say, but it's a task of a few generations. If you want to digitize some 5 million copies, imagine. And it's not as though it's not been done. The IGNCA has already done microfilms of these.
Yeah.
But to convert the microfilms into a systematic order,
it's just
but other parts of the world, people have done it. The entire records of the British rule in India is the India Office records, and they currently occupy 9 kilometers of shelving. 9 kilometers of shelving in the British Library, and they are completely. I mean, if you go there, I mean, they may not be completely digitized, but you can access anything. So other people in the world have done it. The entire corpus of manuscripts in the Darbar Library in Nepal, Sanskrit, has been digitized under a Nepal-German project. It's available on the net.
Wow.
Yeah. So even the most valuable collection of Sanskrit manuscripts in Pakistan is a collection called the Woolner Collection, based in the Punjab University, Lahore. Even that has been digitized. So I'm saying protection of our heritage has to start with these small things first, I mean, you can do a lot of other things later, but at least can you keep the manuscripts clean and pay your staff better?
Yeah.
I think there's a question from the audience. Uma, she wanted to hear on the story of M.S. Amma getting permission for the song. Can you share that, Venkatesh?
Well, I can. I mean, this was given to me by Mr. V. Srinivasan, who is Mr. Radha Vishwanathan's son, who was M.S. Amma's daughter. Apparently, they had, when Sadasivam sir and MS Amma both had a lot of concerns whether they should be doing this at all. And even though MS Amma had practiced very hard, I mean, Ananthanyama Iyengar was deputed by TTD to go and teach her. So he went and spent time there and taught her. And both his sons have very fond memories of MS Amma's kindness. She wasn't sure if she should do it. So she went to the Kanchi Acharya, Chandrasekhar Saraswati, the Acharya then, and asked him. And he said, please do it. And she went and he said, I see no problem. So she went and did the thing, did the recording, and the royalty, she went and gave it to him. So he said, look, what is Venkateshwara should stay to Venkateshwara. So yeah, that's what happened.
Beautiful story about the royalties.
Yeah, I mean, so the larger story is all in the book, but yeah, this is what happened in a very concise fashion.
I mean, I'm sure by today, many of the audience would realize that there is more to the laddu and the line as far as Tirupati is concerned. I mean, there are only two things that come to our mind. How long is the line going to be? When am I going to get my laddu? How many tokens?
And what Venkatesh Parsathi's books tells us is that this is all a very recent phenomenon, this line concept. But
No, there are case studies of IIM educated teams trying to devise how to optimize the lines and all. So that's another.
No, I'm saying when he talked about his mom attending the seva, it wasn't like this. I mean, it's a very.
So that was the Suprabhata Seva was you were given entry if you did a Anga Pradakshina.
Okay.
Okay, so that was a slightly different shortcut. I mean, it's not a shortcut at all, but
Not a shortcut. Yeah.
I think Krishna Deva Raya is to be blamed because he's the one, after every victory or something of significance, I think he went and gave something to Lord Venkateshwara and then took his blessings. And from then onwards, I think all of us, if we want to ask something or did something good, we are going and visiting him, and hence.
No, Achyuta Deva Raya even more. No, he thought that's his life. He's going to be in Chandragiri, and suddenly by this weird twist of fate, he got to be king. So what happened to him, the turn of fortunes must have like, this is the guy, man, Venkatesha. He will fulfill everything.
So since then, I believe the lines have started increasing to the point today that there is a complex algorithm on what is the time if you're here, what time are your expected visit and all of that. So there's a lot of science and IT in getting a visit to Lord Balaji as well. Yeah.
And you say in your book, last question, sorry, that you decided that this was India's most popular prayer after like a straw poll you did in a restaurant.
yes, in Jayanagar.
But is that true? I mean, did you authenticate it?
No, you're right to ask that question. And look, this is a straw poll, but if you take this as terms of number of cassette records sold.
Right. Yeah.
This is the highest selling non-music in Indian publishing history.
Right.
And while there are lots of these kind of stuff that I had to leave out of the book because the numbers and all are not, I mean, Saregama is not okay with citing numbers. So I don't know how much they sell.
Okay.
But in the public domain, in the Hindu newspaper itself, one of the HFB gentlemen has said that every time we were not meeting our sales targets,
I know.
we would just issue a set of Suprabhatam and we would make our sales numbers. We would just do 10,000, one run of 10,000 Fatak over. The sales target for the year is done. Yeah.
Yeah, the Suprabhatam is the gift that keeps on giving.
Nice way to put it, yes.
The last verse that I want to read aloud and then we'll close the session. So this is the last but one of the verse of, I'm just reading the English translation because I don't want to embarrass with my Sanskrit reading. O abode of Lakshmi, O soul, ocean of all virtues, O essence of all the Vedantas, one who is both known through the Vedantas and whose realization leads to the knowledge of the Vedantas. Therefore, one who is both the cause and effect of all self-realization, one who ameliorates the burdens of an earthly existence and liberates from the cycle of rebirths, O faultless one, O Lord of Venkatahil, good morning to you. I think in one verse, if so much can be packed, for all of us who actually can find time to go through all the verses and its meanings, every morning is going to be a good morning for sure. Thank you all, audience. Thank you, Venkatesh Parthasarathy. It's been a pleasure actually getting in touch with you and the honor to host this session. Thank you, Rupa, as always, for
Thank you.
making.